I badly need a haircut. It's a bad thing seeing yourself on camera. All right.
Stop camera. Well, we've got the audio. That's what we want. And then go back to your PowerPoint.
Okay. Okay. All right. Shall I go ahead? Okay. Okay. Could I get my PowerPoint on there? The PowerPoint? Yeah. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Some of you know me, some of you don't. I'm senior lecturer here at UEL for commercial photography. And I just joined UEL, and so since not very many people know me very well, they mistakenly invited me to give this cultural maneuvers for you. But yeah, this is, I was born and brought up in Mexico, and a lot of my work is so I'll be talking to you a little bit about a project that I did called Arquitectura Libre, which is primarily on the architecture of buildings that are built by architects who, no, sorry, the buildings that are built by migrants who go from Mexico to America and send money back. So, and the project in it is a sort of umbrella architecture, primarily in architecture. Previously also architecture and how architecture affects communities and how communities affect architecture also. I'm really interested in the representation of what is imagined in terms of construction and what actually happens once communities live in it. In Mexico, there's a sort of a residential complex called the scene of massive tragedy.
This one seems to be.
Oh my God, that's loud. There was a student massacre there during student protests by the government. Thousands of unarmed students were killed. There was also one of these buildings fell down in the 1985 earthquake in Mexico. So it's a place that's sort of steeped in tragedy, and it was very difficult for me to find a way of approaching it and sort of giving the community its own voice so that whoever saw the project could also have sort of an understanding of what Tlatelolco was rather than what was imagined for it. It was originally designed by the architect Mario Pani, and it was the introduction of modernism in Mexico. And so what I decided to do, up until that point, I worked very much as a documentary photographer. I would be alone with my camera and take pictures of communities and get to meet them, and it was a very sort of subjective process. It was my point of view. With Tlatelolco, I got decent funding and I could invest a lot of time in this project and actually get help. And so I decided to involve the community, and I produced this sort of light show with the different lights in each person's apartment, thinking that their inaction or their non-participation would be a reflection of the community and they would have a say in whether my project failed or succeeded. And that for me was very, very important for them to be participant in that. I'm not going to go too deeply into that project, but this is sort of what turned out in the end. I didn't think that it would be a success, and it did turn out to be quite a massive success. 95% of the building participated, and there was no rehearsal. They really didn't know what they were doing, and it was one night over 20 minutes, 15-second change every time. People would have to run from their living room to their dining room. They had a script. Each apartment had an independent script of when to turn on what light in their apartment. Massive undertaking. It was something that I was felt that I wanted to do something that I felt that I couldn't necessarily do, that I could very well fail in, because I'd always done stuff that was slightly more predictable and I had a little more control over it. But what I felt was, after that part of the project, what was missing was how that sort of showed the communal side of Tlatelolco, but it didn't show how the community was made up of individuals. And I wanted the architecture to speak to that also, instead of the people that lived there. And so I shot their living rooms with exactly the same composition, and through the lived-in space and using the consistent architecture, you could have a sort of portrait of a family, but without the family present through the architecture. So this is, I mean, I'm just giving you a basic summary of this project. It was a lot more sort of nuanced and it's a lot more extensive than that. But it's an introduction to what preceded preceded Arquitectura Libre, which is the project that we'll be talking about today. So here are just some of the pictures from that. And yeah, here are some of the pieces that resulted from that project. So yeah, Mexico has, as I'm sure many of you know, a massive population. Mexico City, it's, I think now stands around 28 million people. And so housing is a big, big issue, not only, oops, I'm losing mic here, oh, there we go. And so the government's response, or the government's answer to this, is low-income housing that is really quite inhumane. They're tiny, teeny houses. I think they're 50 meters squared, and the whole family is expected to live in them. They're made of very, very shoddy materials. They don't last very long. I shot these houses when they were being built, and about 5-6 years later, after they were brand new, I decided to visit them again. And this exact house ended up being this just 5 years later. And a lot of these houses are built very, very far away from the city, and they are sold to individuals who work in the city. So these people end up spending 4 or 5 hour commute to work in very low-paying jobs in the city. So the whole way that it's sort of designed is a complete mess and isn't helping anyone. And so what I noticed when I rode around Mexico, traveled around Mexico, is I would find these other houses, these houses that were built independently and that were very colorful and very imaginative. And Mexico, the whole landscape is peppered with these houses all over the place. And most people, most sort of you know, city people try and sort of ignore those houses because they like the idea of the colonial, pretty old villages of Mexico with adobe houses. And so these houses are like sort of considered an eyesore by many. But they appealed to me. I thought they were really interesting. I thought there was something there. And my wife, who isn't from Mexico, she's from Spain, she said, you know, there's something in these houses. There's something really, really amazing. There's like this freedom of expression in these houses. People are creating houses that are completely unique, one from the other. And this is something that you look into. And she actually ended up coining the term free architecture, Arquitectura Libre. And so I started shooting these houses from the street as I drove by in different parts of Mexico. This house I went to visit recently, and it fell down in the last earthquake, Mexico's last earthquake. And I would see these amazing structures from the street. And I just shot them from the street. I wouldn't ask about them. I was just interested in the form of them rather than anything else. I wasn't curious at that point to sort of ask any questions or do any investigation or any exploration until yeah, so I'll get to that later. But what happened also is I saw how this same unusual sort of fantastical architecture manifested itself in other parts of society. So in Sinaloa, I'm sure some of you have heard of the Sinaloa cartel. So I went there to do an artist talk once, and there's a very famous graveyard just outside of Culiacan, and it's by this chapel for this sort of underworld saint called Jesus Malverde. And this is where a lot of the narcos from Culiacan, from Sinaloa come, and they sort of leave offerings and prayers to Malverde, who is a sort of Robin Hood kind of character. They leave pictures of them with their guns and sort of put money and offerings on the walls. And it's a really impressive place. But close by to that is this graveyard, which has these massive mausoleums. I mean, this is where someone is buried, and that's where someone else is buried. And that is, instead of a headstone, you're getting these huge, massive houses. Inside, they have plasma screen TVs so that the families can come in on Day of the Dead and have a party there with them. They're really quite outrageous. But what I found very curious about them is that they would also have these very different styles in architecture, reflecting the taste of the individuals who were buried in them. So you would have one that was sort of maybe modern, suburban modernist, another that's more sort of colonial, another that would sort of reflect more sort of a Disney castle kind of idea. And I thought that was really interesting. And so I started thinking about that and applying, getting more curious about the houses that I would find on the edges of the street. And I started doing a little more investigation. And I found this amazing academic called Sarah Lynn Lopez from the University of Texas at Austin. And she did this book called The Remittance Landscape, which really illustrated to me how these houses are really tied to migration. And they just seem to me so incredibly unfunctional. And I started understanding that a lot of these houses are actually not really necessarily built to be lived in, but they're built to replace the person who is left, the person who's no longer a part of his community or her community, who left to go to the north to get a better life. And they send money home with this idea of building their sort of dream house, and that one day they'll go back, even though many deep down inside know that they'll never go back. So they're monuments, they're representations, they're form, and they're not function. And all of these sort of ideas seem incredible to me. Also the way that the houses are a manifestation, a very concrete manifestation of this cross-cultural experience between America and Mexico. And so I started doing a bit more work on them, and more formal pictures, and sort of seeing these influences from, you know, Russia or from, and trying to understand where they get these ideas from. And sometimes it was a bit difficult to talk to people because I would be run out of town by people that were very suspicious that I was taking pictures of their houses. But other times people were incredibly friendly, and they would tell me that they would get their ideas from, it wasn't their house, it was their uncle's house who was in San Diego, and he would send them a WhatsApp picture from a house that he was working on in construction, and then they would run out of money, and 6 months later, he would have another job, but he would be working on a chalet in Aspen, and so he would be wanting to be quite influenced by the chimney and the sort of wood cabin architecture, and so he would incorporate that into their houses. And then what started happening is that architecture of the towns started emulating this migratory architecture. And so the churches started having the same sort of architecture as opposed to the colonial, classical colonial architecture. They started having more of this sort of migrant architecture. But as you can see, some of these buildings are very, very funky. They have, they're quite unique. The idea behind them is that you are not copying anyone else, that you have your own house and that reflects you as an individual. And what I started finding is sort of patterns. They would never be the same, but I would start finding that some of the older houses from a previous generation were much more fantastical. They were castles. They were these buildings that were a lot more sort of mad and crazy. And the ones that were more contemporary, the younger sort of migrants would sort of build stuff that was more sort of modern and contemporary and maybe more, in this case, brutalist. So you'd have a house like this that's sort of more fantasy, and then you would have these sort of structures that are slightly more urban and maybe more coherent. And then what would happen is I started noticing that a lot of these houses are built. Hello, there we go. They would emulate sort of American McMansion suburbia, right? And I'm not an architect, so I can't really speak with any authority on this, but it seems. Okay. Sorry.
Try that. See if that works.
Testing, yeah, okay. There, do you want this one? I've got 3 mics on me.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go add it to the collection. Okay, one of them will work. There we go. Okay. There we go. So yeah, these houses, they seemed that they shouldn't be built from this material. You know, these houses, I've seen them being built in America, and they're built of plywood and 3x4 wood, and they're these massive mansions that a hurricane comes along and blows them down. But they're not built out of concrete, you know? How can you build these roofs, out of poured concrete? It's just mad, you know? So you get these, you know, it just spoke to the engineering skills of these non-architects that are incredibly talented and imaginative and will find a way around any problem. And that was really what I learned from this experience, the spirit of these houses being built, where, no, I can't, just because I'm not trained in something, you know? And that sort of was something that slowly appealed to me as something I should adopt in my own practice as well. And so, yeah, what you'd see also is this sort of scale. So a lot of these houses should be massive houses, but they're being built on a tiny plot of land. So they just compress them and have all these windows into this very small space. So you still get the sort of grandeur feeling of a mansion, but it's in the space that you have. So as I investigated more and actually started talking to people, I went to this community, the Masawa community, a couple of hours north of Mexico City, and an amazing community, and a great majority of the men in that community work in construction and travel to the north. And I was actually working for an NGO, and we're working with the children and with different schools. And I went into this cyber cafe with computers, and the children were learning how to make a PowerPoint presentation. And while they're learning to make this PowerPoint presentation, I started seeing that they were doing Google searches of mansions, of houses, of dream houses. And a lot of the houses that they were finding were very similar to the houses that were being built around them. And I suddenly started realizing that their references, a lot of these references are coming from just basic Google searches, online searches. And I thought that was really interesting, because there's a really big disconnect from what these communities used to live in and what they're starting to live in. And I feel that somehow this is quite representative of contemporary Mexican architecture somehow, and should be embraced as such. And it's starting to happen, funnily enough. I give talks to architecture students in universities in Mexico, and they now have modules that are specifically geared towards this kind of architecture. I don't know if we're going to have audio on this, but I'm going to play you a very brief video of this community in Chiapas, and I'll speak a little bit more about Javier. Do we have? No, we don't have audio, do we? Well, you'll just have to read the subtitles. But yeah, so this is a community called San Juan Chamula in Chiapas in the south of Mexico, and it's an autonomous community. They have self-government, and they don't allow large companies from the outside to set up shop in San Juan Chamula, so it's all sort of local businesses. And so there's a sudden local wealth that's happening there. And this wealth is being invested into the buildings that are... Oh yeah, that's the sound, okay. Yeah, I'll just put it quickly from the beginning.
Si ya no lo haces por miedo, si ya de ahí dejas de hacerlo por miedo, nunca aprenderás. Por eso, aunque tengas miedo, aunque te vayan, sea como sea, tú tienes que sacarlo. Una vez que lo sepas hacerlo, ya de ahí vas a aprender. Lo que debes de vencer es el miedo. Así es, porque agarré esa palabra cuando empecé a trabajar y a trabajar. Cuando me preguntan, pues, si quisiera hacer más o menos, digamos, en esta parte, ¿sabes hacer cosas? No, que eso no, pero lo intentaré. Así es donde vine cambiando mi vida, pues, cuando conocí a la mujer y como... Es que hay personas que les gusta el detalle. Cuando hay casas con detalles, todo tipo de las que les gusta, y hay personas que no, donde dan chance para una persona, para un hombre que le gusta todo, es detalles,
So Mario started building houses when he was 12, 13. He would go on construction sites and just sort of learn how to mix cement and stuff. And then when he was 16, he built his first house. When I met him, he was maybe 28, 29, and he had built 36 houses. Mario's case was really interesting because it was the first time that I met someone who didn't fall in this sort of category of migration, and he actually didn't go. But he was very inspired by the architecture that was being built in the communities around him from people who did go. So that was his education, and he's adopted this style of sort of the architecture of remittances as part of his architecture. And he's now constantly being invited to build houses, and he takes great pride in never building the same house or a similar house. All his houses look really quite different. So what happened, so in Mexico there's a sort of 7-Eleven kind of chain called OXXO, which is owned by Coca-Cola. And in this community, since foreign companies are not allowed in, they built their own version, which is called OXXO, a local businessman. So it's this sort of creativity and this autonomy that allowed this community that was really struggling for many, many decades to actually have some sort of agency in terms of self-government and as well as money and development. So Mario, who built these houses, had been hired by I think it was Miguel or Francisco, who was a local businessman to build his house. And he had a brand new car, he had 2 houses, he was a very religious man, but he couldn't write. He couldn't read or write, and he would send me audio WhatsApps. So the lack of education was not something that didn't, formal education was not something that limited them in terms of their own progression within their own community. This is what San Juan Chamula looks like. And this is the community that lived there. This is how the traditional dress is. And this is Mario de la Cruz, some interiors that we've seen in the video of his house. These amazing sort of upside down meringue cake things are made by filling a Coca-Cola bottle with concrete, white concrete, and then you put it against the ceiling, a plastic Coca-Cola bottle, and then you squeeze it and it sort of shoots up and then you pull it down. And so that gives a ceiling texture, for example. That's something that they came up with. And then there would be things like this that you wouldn't, there would be no sort of master plan for the house. The house would often be built in a sort of progression. And so sometimes there would be mistakes, like putting the staircase where there's a window. And sometimes those mistakes would warrant the staircase to be torn down and rebuilt, but sometimes they'd say, it works fine. And that gave also the house a sort of uniqueness. And around the houses, you would see these also photographs of other houses that would probably be a source of inspiration to them. It was interesting also that some of these houses would have modern kitchens installed in them, and then their family, their mothers would move in, but the mother would much prefer to use the traditional cooking method rather than the stove. So often these houses were at sort of cross purposes with what the community was used to or what they'd want. Yeah. And here are some more houses that he built, so you can see how very different they all are. And of course, I had to go to the local graveyard and see if this tradition was also present in the graveyard, and it was. So I was also curious how this phenomena, if it was uniquely Mexican or if it's something that I could find in other parts of the world. And I did a lot of sort of Google Street View searches and a lot of research also. And I discovered that, of course, this phenomena exists really wherever there's a community or a country who are economically disadvantaged, and a large part of the community migrates, are economic migrants, and they send money back. And so I went to this one community in Transylvania called Huedin, and I found these amazing. So these are from the Roma community who have, are traditionally known to be nomadic. And they have these absolutely outrageous mansions, this tiny village just filled with these incredible houses. I mean, if you count the floors on these houses, some of them are 11 stories tall because they've got like 7 stories in the roof alone. And they have these incredible sort of pressed tin decorations, and some of them have like all Audi and Mercedes-Benz logos or the name of the family encrusted in the ceilings. So this just also seemed really incredible to me. I then, just before lockdown, the first lockdown, I went to India, to Tiruvannamalai and to Pondicherry, where I also saw something quite similar. But there are these amazing differences that I noticed also. In Mexico, the houses, the structure, the form was really, really important, but not necessarily the finishing, the painting. Whereas in India, the painting was incredibly important. The design, the sort of graphic way that the buildings are painting was really, really important. So, often the houses would be quite similar. There'd be these rectangles, but what would differentiate one house to another would be these color schemes that were just incredible, very postmodernist. And when I was there, there was while I was doing my research before traveling, I found this as a hotel, a very cheap hotel on the outside of Pondicherry. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be able to stay in a castle. So I made a reservation there. And I went, and when I went there, the owners said that there's a Indian, actually it's international, but there's a hotel chain, and they were managing it, and they didn't allow foreigners to stay there. And I realized later that the reason is because the hotel is just so mad and crazy that they knew that foreigners would complain constantly and would sue them, etc. So it was only people from India that were allowed to stay there, and it caused a big argument at the beginning, but then I understood and I had to stay somewhere else. But so this man built this house with no architectural training for his wife, and then ended up making it a hotel. And it was, he's this amazing character. Right now he's building what he calls a spaceship, which includes a room of zero gravity. And when I asked him how that is possible, he said, well, that's a secret. And he would send me videos. He sent me a video once COVID happened, that he had discovered the cure to COVID, and he had been interviewed in the press, and he sent me these videos of the news sort of interviewing him. And he's just this amazing person that was able to, so this castle has these sort of secret passageways that end up like underneath the pool, and they have one room that if you whisper in one room, you can hear it in another room. This, of course, is the reason why it wasn't rented out to foreigners. There were secret traps. There were like places that a sort of carbon monoxide gas could be pumped in. It was really like this crazy place. And he would prepare these baths for his guests with water and warm water and goat's milk. No, donkey milk, which is what Cleopatra apparently would take her baths in. So here he showed me a bit of his process and how he does actually have plans, but he's completely self-taught, and these were some of the houses that he had built. So what happened next is a lot of this project got some interest in the press and was published quite widely, and then it went a little bit viral. So a lot of the pictures were stolen from my archive and were turned into memes and started to go sort of a little bit crazy online. And at first I was a little defensive and protective, and I didn't know what to do, and I wanted to protect my copyright. And then I thought, no, I think maybe I'll just join in the community and see how this takes a life of its own also, because, you know, in a way, me taking pictures of someone else's work is also some sort of copyright infringement somehow. And I felt that it would be interesting to see how these pictures go on and live and are sort of reborn somehow else. And so I started joining these online communities that then took over the name of my project and sometimes made reference to me. And I was really interested in what the reaction to these photographs were, or to these buildings. And what I started discovering was Mexican society was, in all its sort of true nature, was coming through in the commentaries with very racist and classist commentaries, and also other commentaries of support. And you could always tell sort of who was saying what in what community. So I thought that was really interesting, and I started documenting all this chatter online, and in order to reincorporate it into my project. And then there'd be like these renders, and they would be jokes, and people would laugh. And yeah, they would say some pretty nasty things. I have some of the comments translated a little further on, I'll show you. And I was invited to show the project in the most Arquitectura Libre of buildings, in my opinion, by Oscar Niemeyer. It's this amazing museum cultural center in Aviles in Asturias. And it was canceled because of COVID, along with a few other of my exhibitions. So I had to come up with a way to exhibit my work. It had been financed by a 3-year grant, federal arts grant, I was really in despair. For 6 months, I didn't do anything. And then one night I woke up and I said, you know, the project is on people who build their own houses regardless of their expertise, regardless of their finances. Why can I not exhibit my work just because I've had a few shows canceled? And so I decided to make an exhibition that would be mailed to your house. And so I started designing this poster of the houses that would sort of open up and could be folded down into a small little package and be sent. But I wanted it to be accessible to as many people as possible. So I had a version of it, 100 of them, for sort of collectors to finance a project. And then I had a bunch of them that you could ask for it for free and it'd be sent to your house for 2 weeks and you could have it on your wall and you could read the manual, the catalog, and then you'd wrap it up and send it back and it would be sent on to the next person. This is what the poster looks like. And then this is what the catalog looks like. I have a few here, you can pass it around. Oops, sorry, there goes mic number 4. Still working. So here are a few of the catalogs. They're self-designed, self-made. I don't know anything about design. So this was a whole idea of the process, was me getting out of my sort of comfort zone. I designed it on Photoshop, not on InDesign. The drawings, I don't know how to draw, were sort of, either freehand or traces. And this is basically, so I was thinking also of getting things locally, just like the builders from ARQUITECTURA LIBRE. And actually, do you want to help me, Auntie? So this is what you would receive in the mail if you want to just open it up and show people. So I got this amazing textile from Peckham, because I was living in Peckham, so I felt, you know, I wanted to also source local stuff. And then these amazing African prints, also from Peckham. And so each bag would have a different cover and a different lining. Also, so like the houses, they would be very, very different. And these, I'm sure some of you will know the history behind these African textiles that are actually not African. There's a whole colonial background story to them, which I thought was really appropriate to the project also. They were originally, I think, I don't know if Danish, Balinese, Dutch, that's right. They were Dutch, but they were Dutch produced, but inspired by Indonesia. They're Indonesia designs, and the Dutch felt that they could make profit by producing them cheaper, and they sent them to Indonesia, industrially printed. And the Indonesians felt that the quality was inferior, and so they rejected them, and then the Dutch started selling them in the colonies, right? I think that's roughly the story, yeah. So that's basically the project. And then, so you'd get this, you know, library edition, and it would tell you a little bit about the project, and then the catalog, and then you open up the poster. Yeah, could you? Thanks. It's okay. It's not that delicate. I made it so it wasn't that sort of precious also. So here's, you know, some of the sketches and drawings I would do. This is some of the interiors. And here, this will give you an idea of some of the comments that you would get online on the project, which are really pretty shocking sometimes. This image is still going viral all over the internet, still being used every now and again. So yeah, this is basically a little video of what it looks like. And I have a little exercise that I want to do with you guys, but before that, I want to ask you, do you have any questions or comments? Because a big part of this is, I mean, I hope you have questions. You know, this is pretty crazy stuff behind me, so. Yeah, I guess, the color schemes, right. So this poster was hard for me to resolve because the photographs that I took of the houses were at different times of day. Sometimes the sun would be lighting up the houses, in which case I would expose for the house, and the sky would be very dark blue. And sometimes the sun was behind the houses, so I'd get nice white skies, which is what I wanted. So when I first put this grid together, because of the differences of the houses and the differences of the skies, it was just super noisy. And it didn't adhere to the formula of serial artwork, or seriality, where you have to have this sort of consistency throughout the pictures. So the way I resolved it was I ended up cutting out the skies and having white skies for everything, and that allowed for the differences in the buildings to manifest themselves a lot more clearly. Any questions, comments? No? Yeah. Sorry? Did I?
Could you explain the title of
The
the project?
title, Arquitectura Libre. Yeah, so free architecture. It was a term my wife coined on our road trips and seeing these houses. And she said it's an architecture without architects. It's free architecture in so many senses. One, it's not sort of driven by this idea of what is good taste and what isn't good taste. It's free of that. It's free of building codes and constructions. A lot of these houses are built where building isn't controlled. So it has this kind of freedom of expression also. And so it's sort of in that spirit, that's where the title comes from a little bit. Okay, so what we're going to, are there any more questions, comments? Well, here's the thing. Thank you for asking that. I need to get this bit resolved. So I started the library edition, and it was really cool, and you can sign up on my website, and I have about 100 people waiting to receive it. And I applied for financing to get more of these pouches made to cultural institutions, and I didn't get any. So I made a few, 10, 15, and they circulated a little bit. And since then, I've sort of I've stopped, and I've hoped for more financing, and I have this list of people that are interested in doing it. And what I think I'm going to end up doing is doing another 5 of these kits, and have each person, instead of sending it back to me and me sending it out again, send it on to the next person until it just basically dies. Because I have this list of people that are waiting for it, and they've been waiting for it for years. So yeah, that's the library, the fallible library edition. I mean, this whole project is full of holes all over the place, but it sort of works. Anyway, any other questions?
In complete earnest. I find it interesting because there's a tendency, I think, to think that when people are making work, they either do something completely in earnest or in a very sort of ironic, postmodern way. What I find interesting about those is it feels like they're in a spectrum somewhere in between. And I think that's kind of interesting that it's not this either or. Either something's ironic and referential and postmodern, or it's completely earnest. There's a sort of spectrum in between. I feel like that touch on.
Right,
which I find quite interesting.
I think that sort of speaks to the individual as well. I mean, some of them are really emulating what they see, and others are really exploring their own imagination and just building whatever they want. So, yeah, I don't know if that's what you were referring to.
Yeah, I think it's similar. It's
Yeah.
just, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because there's so much classism and racism behind the comments on these Facebook posts. And it made me really sort of be quite self-critical and introspective about whether I would have been part of those commentaries also if it was someone else's project, and if I hadn't been so exposed to it, and I hadn't done so much investigation and realized the actual beautiful nature behind this work and how authentic it is. And in the opening essay of the catalog, I speak to that a little bit about my own privilege and also about my own perspective, and as a sort of Mexican, but from foreign parents, and all this sort of complicated issues that come with documenting work in Mexico from communities that you're not fully a part of. So and it was a big learning experience in that way, in that sense. As a documentarian also, like how I sort of straddled this line between journalism and art practice. So it was giving me certain licenses that in journalism I wouldn't be allowed to have. Yeah. Also, in the catalog, you'll notice, so there's my essay, there's an essay from an anthropologist, there's an essay from a poet, there's an essay from an architect, there's an essay, so it's all these different people, sociologists, so there are these different people that have really very different perspectives on this body of work, because I think it's so versatile. Sorry, you were going to say? Okay.
Yeah. I think I like the way how you structure the book with sort of a lot of buildings.
How I statued them?
No, the buildings.
Oh.
The book. How you made the book. I save it, fold it, and
you liked how?
The way it was folded.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, I stole that from a previous project of mine. The Tlatelolco project also had a very similar layout, and I liked it, and so I just repeated it. But yeah, it works well, and the creases of the folds frame each house, which is something I like. And so when people hang it on their walls, they let it fall, in a box frame. So it's sort of, the creases are part of the project.
It almost looks like the image that you had right at the beginning, that was the image of the building that was gridded up.
Right, yeah, exactly. Cool. Anyone else?
Yeah, I've got a comment, a question. I very much like the fact that your project borders from, in terms of approach and process, borders from the makers of those houses. And it seems to me that those houses in a way are in and against the culture of globalization. What I mean by that is, like, on the one hand, those makers seem to rely on globalized means of communication. Either this is Google searches to come up with a,
Sorry, it's just with the echo and
yeah. So maybe I should take my mask down. I'm saying that, it seems to me that a lot of those houses and their makers are in and against the culture of globalization. So on one hand, the makers seem to rely on globalized means of communication, like WhatsApp with our families abroad, or Googling, to come up with a kind of, patterns and ideas, etc. On the other hand, it seems as if there's a kind of resistance to this globalized architecture that is kind of more mushrooming now in global cities. We see that in London, for example, those kind of Lego-looking buildings that, come up in all those gentrified zones across cities, right? So either you are in Tokyo or in London, they would look pretty similar. And it seems as if these houses are kind of a tendency against that kind of, very globalized architectural image. I'm wondering to what extent your project reflects this, what I see as a tension, as in, like, playing with these ideas around architecture and globalization.
I think it's inspired by a global experience through global pop culture. The houses are inspired by movies that people have watched, by internet searches. So in that sense, they definitely are globalized, but they're inspired by the global sort of experience, and they're inspired by the transcultural experience of going back and forth to different countries. But they're very, very Mexican also, and they're very individualized, and the poly-architecture aspect of them is something that's really important, this embracing of, no, it doesn't have to be purely modernist, it doesn't have to. So I think in that sense, it's something that's not global, it's something that's unique, and I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does, because I think exactly as you said, there is a kind, I see it as a kind of a tension there, you know what I mean? In a way, these buildings seem to be, fitting into this globalized culture, but denying it at the same time.
Right, yeah. They do. It's, anyone else? No. Okay, we have a project, a little quick exercise to conclude this talk. As I said, a lot of, so in the end, I actually did get a couple of shows, small shows. Hopefully I'll get bigger ones later in that amazing museum. But as I said, a lot of these houses are inspired by famous places that people might have seen, either in movies, etc. I like to think, when I saw this house, I don't know if this was intention or not, but when I saw it, reminded me of Falling Water by Frank Lloyd Wright. Probably not, you know, but I just thought it was interesting, and there was some sort of parallel there. But what we're going to do right now is I'm going to ask for 2 volunteers. One of them has to be quite good at sketching, or it doesn't have to be good at sketching, but just half decent at sketching. Anyone raise their hand? It'll be really quick. I promise you it won't be painful at all. Anyone? No? No. Rob, I might have to lean on someone from staff, as no one's going to. No. Oh, I know. Okay, all right. Dan, you good at sketch. You will volunteer. Brilliant. Okay, we have a sketcher. Okay, and the other person has a much easier job. And I'm going to have that person describe. I'm going to give them a photograph of a house, and they're going to describe to you the house, and you're, from their description, are going to sort of sketch it out. Okay, and it's you know, it's meant to not be perfect. That's the whole point of the exercise. So exactly. So thank you so much. What's your name? Michael. Thank you so much, Michael. So I think, where's the sketcher going to go? The sketcher, yeah. Do you want to come over here, Michael? Because you're not going to be able to see what the rest of the crowd will be seeing. And who wants to be who's good at sort of describing? Who's not terribly shy here? Any volunteers? You want to? Okay. So if you could come on this side. And I'm going to show all of you the picture that's being described. And on camera, on the screen, we'll hopefully get the sketch. So you can see sort of what this, I've never done this before. I have no idea really what I'm doing, but I thought it would be fun. So let's see if it works out. Happy to get any feedback here.
It's Pictionary.
There's a picture, yeah, it's sort of like Pictionary, exactly. There you go. It's not unique or original at all.
Take the credit.
Okay. So, yeah, so you need to be on this side, so you can't, wait, yeah, so you can't see what's being sketched.
Where's my reference in here?
Yeah, I'm about to give it to you. It's over, yeah, if you could stand over here. Sorry. And there's your reference image. So this, I just decided to use that cheesy typeface for that thing that I came up with one night, one sleepless night.
Well, it's got a real space-like quality, hasn't it? Vault.
So this is the house that's going to be described, and that might be sketched. Well, will be sketched.
In no way is it middle, is it?
And the reason, I mean, I spoke about this a little earlier on. One of the reasons I'm doing this is because before there was WhatsApp, before there was internet, and when this phenomena existed of these houses, it would be described over the phone. People would call up their uncle in Mexico and say, yeah, I saw this house, and you know the money I sent you? I want you to make it, 3 bedrooms on the bottom, but I want columns over here, and I want a dome. And so that person would have to interpret what is wanted, and then, of course, he'd eventually get home maybe 4 or 5 years later and say, that's not what I was talking about at all.
Are we ready?
I think so, yeah. Don't look, don't look. Okay, are we ready?
Hello, 1, 2.
Are we going to have a countdown, or is this it?
No, we are ready. We are ready. You can start describing the house. Well done.
Oh, no worries, yeah.
What should I do? What should I give you this
I
one?
need a clip.
Okay, I've got a clip here. I'm not using it. And this one here. I've never been so mic'd up.
Yeah, right.
There we go.
Which one is working?
That
One seat.
Yeah, that one's here. I can give you this. Okay, yeah, go ahead and start describing. No, not yet.
Wow.
Oh, right. Thank you.
No worries.
Sorry for volunteering here.
No, by all means.
That's what you get for being articulate.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So we ready? Right, cool. Yep. Okay.
So, from the beginning, I'm going to start with the front door. It's a very vault-like structure, and I can probably guess that this is where all the budget went for the house, because it quite quickly takes a turn for the worse. As we move to the second floor, where there's no windows directly above the vault-like door. Ahead of the windows that aren't filled in are two large columns.
Maybe slower, slower. I don't know. Is that too fast?
A little bit.
Yeah, it's a little bit slower. Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to the windowless first floor windows, in which above there is a seemingly sci-fi orbital outward-looking globe, or semisphere, I should say. So that's somewhat of our front third of the, I guess we could call it a house in this case. Although, as we know, it may be a burial site or something else. Now, to the left of the columns that sort of vertically line the front of the house, we have sort of what you could probably imagine is a sensible church in the Western world, with sort of what is that shape? Let's call them like cathedral-like windows. And then with the first floor above the ground floor windows, we've got a sort of arch that leads to nowhere, quite romantic in its nothingness. And to the left of that, we have two quite normal rectangular windows with stone arches above them. And then that sort of completes the normal side, the somewhat sensible side of this house. If we were to move to the right side, where we can see that the budget was really lacked in this case.
I think you might have to speak to the form, to the outline of the house.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's describe the right side as windowless on the ground floor, so perhaps just some nice shading. As a whole, I think that, okay, we're going to go symmetrical. I think it might just be a
I think we're
symmetrical
sort of
structure.
running out of paper, and we have a good idea of fantasy house in its initial sort of stages.
I can't wait to see.
I think we're good now, unless you want to carry on.
I think I picked up on everything I'd like, to be honest.
Do you want to carry on drawing? Just do a path. Okay, yeah, okay, the path. There we go. I think that's good. I think we actually have the outline of a house. So come and see how you describe this. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
So I think that's a wonderful house. I love that. But this, yeah, I mean, so this is what probably would happen. Someone would see this kind of house and they would describe it, and they would end up with this house, which is great too. It's a wonderful house to have as well. Anyway, so I think that's really all, unless anyone wants to ask any further questions. And
Wait, do anything.
yeah, if anyone wants to do this exercise, they're welcome to stay behind and do a few more. To thank you both for participating, I would like 2 of those. Thank you very much. And if we could have 2 of the 3 catalogs that were passed around, if you could each take one home with you.
Oh,
Thank you so much. And that's it. Yeah, thank you. I think we're a little early, but I encourage you all to go to take a break, of course, but the 88-106A room. It's a new gallery. It's the first time this has ever been a gallery. It's called The Corridor. It's level 5. And yeah, it's going to be opening at 5 p.m. Yeah, so come by, have a drink, and check it out. Yeah, Fine Art is also having an opening, so there's lots to do today. So, yeah, so thank you so much for coming. It was a real pleasure. Thank you.